There's something so valuable about sitting across from a table with someone and saying, how can I help you? Let me understand your story. That question right there to simply open up. I can't tell you how many times we've heard, no one's ever asked me that before. I'm just a number, or I'm just a government program, or I'm just a box to check. No. What's your story? Who are you? Where are you coming from? Those simple things we see change lives over and over.
You've got quite a history, and I'm kind of curious when I go back to senior consultant at Booz Allen, director of performance at the U.S. Small Business Administration, advisor to the secretary at the Department of HUD. What got you interested in organizational continuous improvement?
I think that's always been a driver for my whole life. Real quick, I was born and raised in the Deep South in Alabama. My dad was actually an engineer at NASA at a big facility there in Huntsville. And so, I've always been intrigued to try to do more, to try to make a difference in society and just to see the world as a big place. And so, I've been traveling around a lot. What I found early on is I just wanted to really make a difference. For me, waking up every morning knowing I can drive some impact, but impact at scale was really a passion. And it's been a journey between sectors, between jobs, and sort of going where there are interesting things going on has always been a big aspect of my sort of career.
Yeah, I love that. Having impact at scale, I think, is a goal for a lot of organizations, a lot of people. Most get stuck. Where's the first place they kind of get stuck in being able to do that in your experience?
Oh gosh, I see stuck in a lot of places. First of all, jumping in and kind of parachuting into organizations, how do you quickly organize and align around transformative areas that are going to get people excited every day? And we notice it even at Goodwill, there are generational shifts too in how people perceive work and what they want to accomplish. And so it sounds so basically, and I'm sure in your podcast, you hear this all the time though, setting clarity, really transformative clarity early on what you're hoping to accomplish. Keep it real simple, two or three things that people can think about every day because it drives the organizational culture for what you're looking to do. And what I've noticed is for every sector, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's complications within every sector and we can get into all of that, but setting up that clarity first, and then driving a real performance-oriented process behind it. So if you can find purpose with performance, what I've noticed is you can move the needle quickly in a lot of different organizations and get an employee base that it almost doesn't matter if you're bigger or you're getting smaller. You can get them energized and excited about what you're looking to do. And moving those systems that are complex, and there's change management and there's human autonomy, there's all sorts of things that are in there, but moving those quickly, that is so exciting to see in 6 to 12 months, real needles that move that make a real difference in society.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but I'm always amazed at how senior leadership teams are not aligned around why they're there.
Yes.
Even in the, think about the for-profit world, I think the number one job of a CEO is to continually increase the value of their business. And the senior leadership team should be doing that, but they don't come into their meetings with that mindset.
No, 100%. And there's even the constant process of having to renew yourself and your team around what you're achieving. Because I also notice that you've got to, and at least the way I always have thought about this, and I'm not even saying it's the right way, it's just how I think of things. Everything is sort of a 12 to 18 month sprint. Like I always, and at the end of that 12 to 18 months, you're sort of sitting back reflecting, did I do what I needed to do? Did I accomplish what I wanted? What's that next sprint look like? It's sort of more medium term. It's not so short term where you're just focused on what you're doing tomorrow. And it's not the 10-year plans that can sometimes feel great, but be a bit amorphous. There seems to be a sweet spot in these sort of medium term plans that you can transform organizations very quickly on.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting. I have seen organizations where there's a lot of clarity, they get going, but they never really change much and it gets stale. And what you're talking about is sort of resetting that organizational energy. That's really interesting. I think good advice for a lot of folks.
Well, and you've got to tie what you're doing to something bigger than yourself or your organization. At least for me, that's if I'm going to get up and if the people who are in an organization devoting their lives, their working lives to something, to create something and devote their time and efforts and energy and growth there, they're giving that privilege to an organization, then you've got to think about what you're doing and how you're going to move the needle, again, sort of purpose with scale. And even it's interesting, even at Goodwill, and I know we can get into all of this stuff. the kinds of systemic issues that we see occurring right now, there's a lot that's really coming together. It's really interesting. It aligns to a lot of the philosophies that I noticed you and your podcast are about. But we're witnessing some of that, and that's really motivating for us as a federated, really complicated, local, autonomous, nonprofit type network that we are. It's a way to drive action and scale quickly. Otherwise, if you're not focused on that sort of transformative change, we can just sort of rope a dope our way through years. Time flies.
Yeah, so a couple of big questions come out of what you're saying for me. One is we have clarity at the top, we're driving purpose of the organization. How are you communicating that with tens of thousands of team members and seeing that change? Is it they latch onto it, then all of a sudden they drive towards performance? It's more productive engagement. What are you noticing there?
A couple of things I noticed. One is there's some sector related nuances. Now, I'm guessing most of your listeners and your audience are probably from the private sector, but I think there's actually a lot to learn from the public and the nonprofit and even the political sectors on how they drive change. And what I would say they're really good at is taking stakeholder input into these processes. I remember being in corporations, and you're drawing from best insights from the best minds to say what we should be doing. But are you really getting input from your employees who often know it the best? Are you really getting input from your customers who understand it the best? And sort of iterating with them and playing it back to them in a way that they see themselves as part of building that journey. I definitely think there's something to learn because in nonprofit sectors, particularly complicated nonprofit sectors like we are at Goodwill. Again, Goodwill, we've got 150 local autonomous organizations as part of a collective network. They have the ability to do what they want to do so long as they're adhering to sort of core brand principles and things like that. So it's really interesting how you bring a system like that along. And there's a lot that the for-profit and political and nonprofit type sectors, or nonprofit and political sectors could learn from the for-profit space in terms of the rigor and discipline and accountability and execution, the transparency with our results, both the wins and the failures to celebrate together. There's a lot we can learn from each other, but I think to shorten an answer to what you asked, I think it's getting input early, it's playing it back and iterating it, and then it's bringing people along for it and sort of celebrating both failures and wins together and sort of showing sort of corporate vulnerability, if that makes sense, through the process.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. And I'm also hearing, which I'm a big fan of this, let's make everybody part of this. I don't want them to feel like they're part of it. I want them to be part of it. So it's really genuine going through. And there's organizations out there that will try like crazy and they can't get change to happen over the course of years. And then your approach can come in and change something with over 100,000 employees in a very short amount of time. That is so powerful. It's really interesting. I think it's easy to describe, oh, just do these couple of things, but it only works for a few people. What's the difference? I kind of land on how you apply these things is what matters because we're fighting all these forces that are against you, and it's how you react to those along the way. But what are your thoughts?
I think you hit it. I mean, there's a definite difference in sort of an ownership mentality versus a renter's mentality, right? And even if you go back 120 years in Goodwill's origination, our founder uh, said something very interesting. We're not a charity, but we're a chance. And we're bringing people along with rebuilding their lives and making choices to improve their lives. And so my point is, you have to be a vested owner in that change process, whatever it is in whatever organization there is. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, it's interesting, employee ownership processes certainly makes you a real owner versus a renter. And that's always interesting. But there are ways to engage people to get them excited and be part of the process and to see, not a loss of autonomy through a new strategy or a new transformation, but a way to bring them along for that and get people excited. And the whole, I think of all these like disparate dots on a map and how do we organize and align and sort of bring a system along based on a diverse set of needs and issues and that's what's a lot of fun and that's how you move the needle quickly. And in organizations like ours that are very federated, we're very locally embedded. We're very innovative. We're very scrappy. It's part of our DNA at Goodwill to help people and understand those local issues. But we've lacked scale historically because of that. So how do we achieve scale in these hyper local, hyper federated type models? That's the nut that we're trying to crack right now at an organization that serves over 2 million per year and places, hundreds of thousands of people per year into sustainable positions, jobs, because we believe that work is purpose.
Yeah. So a little bit on the structure. So I read the 2024 impact report, super impressive. Must be easy to find employees when you look at the impact that you guys are having. But with 151 local organizations, so the almost 3,400 individual stores that you have, they're divided up amongst those organizations, yes?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay, and then majority of them are US and Canada, but you've got a presence in Brazil, Finland, Italy, and South Korea. So is the plan scaling it to 100 or more countries at some point?
It is. And when you look, and if I focused on our core, let's call it North America, which is, 90+% of where our work is, today, and many people don't know this, today, Goodwill is North America's largest workforce provider. And so what does that mean? It means if you think of our work like a business almost, we've got our competitive advantage in our mission is that we've got better access to people with needs than anyone. Like we are that embedded in our communities. We understand the needs of our communities. And so those services that we provide are customized based on those needs. But we fund those programs through our resale enterprise, which are those 3,400 stores, the 140,000 employees, many of which themselves have faced barriers in their lives or made decisions that we all wish we wouldn't have done. I mean, we've all gone through that process, but that's how ROI is generated. That's how the funding is generated for our mission programs. So that's how we're organized. And it's interesting, we not only help people through the process, we actually help the planet as well. And all we really do in our resale enterprise is divert things away from the landfill. And I know material and sort of economic value is a big part of one of your pillars. And that's an area we could get into as well on the resale side. That's been a fascinating, that ecosystem there has changed a lot over the years.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of nonprofits, I would say probably most, really struggle with the fundraising piece of it. And I think it's
Yes.
just brilliant that you've set up an organization to actually fund your philanthropic efforts. What percentage comes from the resale enterprise versus donors? Because you've got quite a few donors as well.
We do have donors, but the vast majority, absolute vast majority is funded through resale enterprises or other kinds of grants through the process. And these are things like state, local, and federal type grants. So we've got, programs to support older workers through the labor department or, so it gets into that, but primarily it is generated through our stores and through those resale enterprises, those dollars being returned into those local communities for these programs.
That's fantastic. A friend of mine started an organization called New Freedom, and here in Phoenix, they take previously incarcerated, pick them up when they get out, bring them in for 90 days, train them. And what they're finding is that a lot of these construction related companies, for example, and there are others, prefer their trained team members coming out over the general public when they go out looking to fill those. Are you doing much with the previously incarcerated?
That's a great, but not familiar with that program, but absolutely we do a lot with folks previously incarcerated. To your point, it's recidivism rates are roughly 50%. Typically, 50% will actually end up back in prison. But with those sort of interventions and working with people early on, and what we found too, is the issues. This isn't like a technical skill issue to get people back to work. And one in nine males today are out of the workforce at prime age. And if we're going to have this country and really North America be more competitive, we're going to have to get everybody back into this workforce in the right way. But what we've seen is those recidivism rates being in the single digits if that choice is made and if you actually work with them early. And again, what we found, the issues in the American and North American workforce today, first of all, they're deeper and more complex than ever. And they're primarily foundational supports. This is why it's more complicated. It's issues around childcare, transportation, healthcare. Like it's this sort of foundational base that we've seemed to have lost. We've sort of lost our way. And the old systems that we've had to train people, the old days of getting in that corporate ladder or going up 30 or 40 years, give them a little technical training up front when you join, but then you're on your way. Those days are done. And our workforce programs, both from the federal government, even state and local, have not adapted to that. And so that's why we're in the process of adapting to that, because we're seeing huge shifts across society. I mean, it's a once in a century reordering where, we see socially issues of trust in institutions collapsing. We see things like social isolation at record highs. We see suicide rates at highs. Economically, we see, we're wasting more value than we retain. We depend on these sort of fragile, far-flung supply chains. There's some hollowness to even sort of our economic systems. And then even humanly, you see work changing faster than ever. I mean, this is literally, industrial revolution scale with things like AI, but compressed into years versus decades, right? So you've got this confluence of sort of each of our major systems all coming together. And and so that's what's really interesting that we're observing. And that's why new approaches are going to be required. And we hope to be at the forefront of that.
Yeah, the second question that was coming to mind is from the two I mentioned earlier was there's all of these efforts. What you're doing at Goodwill is amazing, and there are lots of organizations doing it, more pouring in every year, and yet a lot of these macro results are going the wrong direction. And so what's really causing that? And I start to wonder when I look at the political climate out there, it almost seems like the most important thing is who's going to win in the country culturally, not creating value. And I don't think we're creating even 10% of the value that we could in this country. And what if it was 20% or 50% or dream state 80%? This would be incredible. So that's sort of how I look about the future and in my vision when I think about it. Seems like that's aligned with what you're trying to do at Goodwill. And then it ties into what to me, what is capable leadership? It's a leader that's capable of achieving the results for the position they have, and they're moral. So I think that's our biggest deficit on the planet is having enough leaders that are both capable and moral. And I know that you're in charge of leadership development at Goodwill, and you've done that in past positions. How do you think about leadership? That was kind of a big statement that I made there, but it's wild for me to watch. There's a few amazing leaders, and then there's a number of them that are just situational based on resources, power, money that's available.
Well, I think it gets back to similar issues of our foundations to stand on. You know what I mean? I've seen leaders that, maybe could talk a good game, maybe blessed to be able to lead certain ways, but sort of the depth and sort of foundations aren't there. And so for many people, that's in a lot of different ways. It could be your faith, it could be your purpose, it could be your family. And what we found is there's key sort of pillars of your life that you have to start from if you're going to be successful. Again, this gets back to the analogy. I remember talking to a really large retail organization that was needing to hire 50, 100,000 employees. And they're saying, how do we do this? And how do we hire at scale? And again, the answer to that is the last thing you as an organization want to do is jam technical skills on individuals when the needs are much deeper, more complex, and they're foundational for not just frontline workers or people coming out of incarceration or for young people coming out of school. These are societal foundation issues that are sort of being reordered as we speak. And so just as on the macro scale, there are issues of childcare, healthcare, transportation, basic sets of skills and sort of confidence building that we found at Goodwill. I think it's an example for leaders as well to sort of find your purpose and sort of a calling for, essentially a renewal of our resources that we have here. And that's really, I mean, if you look back, that's what, our greatest untapped resource is that energy of renewal. It's both in our people, in our goods, and in our ideas. And we've hollowed them out like we have. And the metric you look at to see if we're doing that, I think one of the best ones is upward mobility. Now, that's sort of a technical term for many, but in a lot of ways, it's the American promise. The American dream is you're going to move up. You can do better than your parents. You've got to, if you work hard, you commit. And I remember when my parents were born in the 1940s, they had roughly a 90% chance of doing better than their parents. I mean, they grew up in a wonderful time, sort of post World War II, setting a new order that was really American led in a lot of ways. What you've seen is that mobility decline to the point where my kids growing up in this generation have a less than 50% chance of doing better than me. And so the whole promise of what we're looking to deliver, the whole promise of the work and working hard and getting there is under question. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. We've gone through these systems and cycles in history before. We can look to history as a barometer for these kinds of things. There are periods of time where trust in institutions were at these levels. There are periods of time where economic mobility were at these levels. But we've got to learn from them. And it's a little scarier now because we've got 100 feeds telling us every minute that stuff like this is going on. It's a little bit different right now, but we've gone through this before. And so that's the metric of concern is on the mobility piece. Now, it's encouraging to see some early stages. It's encouraging to see us in the Goodwill space. We're looking to scale and we're seeing really promising results, but it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of people committed to doing this.
And where do you see the workforce evolving as AI and its usage sort of evolves over time? And and culturally, what's an acceptably good job to have? Because it was crazy to me a while ago when all of a sudden you're only cool if you have this tech job or do something along these lines. And maintaining things, which keeps the world running, are just not cool jobs. And when I had my aerospace business, we had hundreds of machinists, technicians, and it was the coolest thing ever doing that kind of work. And I want to bring that back. I'm a fan of micro, and I do agree there's dignity in all work, and keeping the world running is the most important stuff. But what do you see happening with the workforce with AI coming in and all these changes? Because I think a lot of people are freaked out and kind of worried about this. Robots will take over, et cetera.
And we definitely, and we see that too, right? We see the impact on the workforce. We see the speed of the change that's underway. But at the same time, I think we're not doomsayers. Again, we've seen these kinds of disruptions before. Again, probably not in the compressed time. This is really interesting how a lot of this is moving so quickly that we can learn from. But I think there's a couple things that we've noticed at Goodwill. Again, I mentioned the workforce is more complex now. The needs are actually much more complex. So the days of just basic training and even technical training, those are largely over. Like it's more complicated. It's more nuanced. It has to be accomplished through partners, best in class partners delivering elements of service, but together as a system, right? That's kind of our sort of vision of how we bring a lot of the mission services together in our local communities. Cause you'd be impressed, Lee, if you're looking for even basic levels of support locally, in your community, you need X for some assistance. You're ping-ponged across a lot of different agencies and departments, all well-intentioned, but it's akin to going to the DMV, times 20, and so we're looking to really improve that. But so that's one, is I think the workforce is much more complex. The second is, we've certainly seen, changes in traditional credentials and how they're valued in the workplace. Again, the days of you got to get that 4-year sort of general type degree to get out there, and sort of there's almost a stigma if there's not. I think we've learned really quickly to sort of get back to some of our roots on things like trades and technical skills, or these employers that are plucking the best and brightest out of high school. We see a lot of that. We think a lot of that's going to increase a lot. And so what it means is if you're a university or college that's best in class, that does bring value, you're in you have great footing. But I think it means for those universities that may not in all their different programs, I think we're going to see a bit of a reckoning over the next couple of decades while we figure out what it means to be a successful, worker out in the workplace. I also think work in and of itself is not as defining as it once was. Like, again, as humans, we're a bit more complex. We want to serve, we hear it all the time, particularly in younger employees, they want to make a difference, and they're making a difference not just in their work, but at home and in their hobbies. And it increasingly blends together. It's not the work every morning. You got to go to work in the warehouse and you come back and that's your life. It's much more nuanced now in this sort of post-COVID environment. So we do see a lot of that going on too. And what we found though is for those particularly employers who do commit to their employees. So, I'm willing to work with an employee to ensure that they grow in multiple areas, or I'm committed to work with that employee on childcare and healthcare, or maybe there's some transportation issues that I want to help solve. That commitment of the employer actually drives employee retention and ROI for those individuals. And it's crazily, I go back, thinking back some of my private equity days, you would have an economic model for an equipment purchase going out 10 years. You do all the CapEx expenses. You would know every bit of the ROI on equipment purchases. But for humans and the ROI of an individual, and to be able to put a couple of $1,000 up front to get those individuals into the right place, in the right mindset, with the right commitment, that is a massive ROI for these organizations. It's untapped. And almost all the CEOs, and I've heard this from several, don't think of it that way. There's no ROI model on a human being. I mean, we don't even think about it that way, but we should, because that's going to be a real competitive differentiator, even more than a piece of equipment. It's almost unfortunate when you look at it. And so that's something we want to really be a part of, is helping educate that as well.
Yeah, getting the people part right, that creates all the value when you put it together. I'm hearing from more CEOs saying they don't want college grads because they don't like what they're seeing coming out of that. And I've always thought, at least for a long time, the purpose of an education is to create value in the world, not go through a conveyor belt system with a bunch of debt at the end of it.
That's right.
And there are many, many paths to be able to actually do that. But the investment in people, so I've worked with organizations, no problem buying, $1 million piece of equipment to do something. And I ask about leadership development, and they say, well, why should we work on that?
Right.
And that's kind of driving all the decisions. And I have a number of communities that I personally lead for Dinner Table, and these are families getting together to more intentionally create value as a family and raise kids that will create value in the world. And last night, from a discussion with one of these communities, the biggest takeaway from a new parent in the room was, wow, I spend a lot of time on work and other things. I don't spend enough intentional time with my kids. But the few times that I have, they light up, and it's so much better. It's like, I'm going to make sure that I do that. Even transitioning into having a standard monthly family meeting, talking about goals, everybody's job for the family, what it means to be a leader in the family. So I'm seeing it in the organizational world. We'll spend money on equipment, do these long projections and facilities and all that, but not the people. Same thing in the families. It's so obvious, but it's being missed by a large number. What are your thoughts around that?
It's you're, I think, 100% spot on that. Those basic foundational principles, that is what we're missing. We've sort of run ahead, with the speed of innovation and technology, we've kind of run ahead of ourselves a bit, right? And we're going to have to sort of renew ourselves and our purpose if we're going to succeed and speed up again, which we will, right? Which we will. And so your example of the family, I think that's a great one, right? Again, and we see it at Goodwill every day. Like that, ironically, the most important thing we found in the people that we serve is you've got to want to change. You have to commit to making a difference or make that change, that mental decision shift. And what we found is so many don't. And you have to get people into a place where they can. So your example of the family dinner table conversations, that's something simple that we could all commit to today. Reconnect with your family, and not just your family. We see it at Goodwill too. Reconnect with your local community and what it means to be a neighbor. In a weird way, we're more connected today than ever before, but we're more disconnected than ever because we vote in bubbles. We don't talk to our neighbors. Families are dispersed. You've got a lot of these examples that lead, again, and I mentioned this before, to things like social isolation and metrics that we see at historic highs. Like, we haven't dealt with these kinds of things before. So those are the places to start. Start with your family, start with your local community, get involved. For us, and selfishly, it means donate and give. We would love if, you clean out that closet and donate to Goodwill, because that's how we repurpose these things and
Which I do,
bring
by
sort
the
of
way.
value.
So thank you.
No, absolutely. I had a little selfish plug on that, but for us, those kind of elements, that is how we rebuild in a very micro way, but it's how we rebuild systems, of human participation, and of circularity, and sort of keeping value in the local community. Because when we grow that, that's how we're going to strengthen ourselves.
Yeah, what I'm noticing, and I agree with everything you said there, is that connecting with communities. I want to build a community of families raising kids that create value in the world. And in 18 months so far, we have over 40,000 parents in our community in 67 countries. I want it to go to millions. That's our plan over the next few years. But getting them in an environment where they're comfortable sharing where it can make a difference, because it almost feels like a lot of these families just, people in general want to show you this perfect thing. They want to be vulnerable and say, I really need help here. And some of the examples that will come up when we talk about creating value as a family, it's holistic, it's material, emotional, and spiritual. Material is easy. Increase net worth 10%. On emotional and spiritual, it's who's leading, participating, and not participating in the family on improving what it feels like to be in the family or improving connectedness across the board. And when a family member comes in or a family comes and says, hey, we're really struggling, let's just say financially, and a lot are these days, here's what we're doing today. Do you have any ideas to help us, not asking for a handout in any way, but to help us take better steps forward to improve our position? There's always significant, additional ideas being thrown on the plate that they run with and get super energized and excited. So I guess my long build up to a question here is, what are you observing around what it takes to get these communities to connect in a way where they can really benefit, not just show what they want everybody to see and put up a wall to the things that, if they were to be more transparent or vulnerable, they could get some real help?
I think it's a wonderful question. And I'm just sort of spitballing a little bit, but I think one thing I've noticed is succeeding and failing together brings vulnerability. It's the same thing even in organizations, right? You've got to figure out a way, if you can fail fast, but then celebrate that failure together as both as a vulnerability and a rallying cry, and because it's reflective of who we are as humans, making mistakes all the time, right? And that's the thing for us too. And I will say it's one thing I like about Goodwill selfishly is, it doesn't really matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've come from, doesn't matter who your parents are, doesn't matter the decisions you've made in the past. There's sort of forgiveness and then move on from that. And making that commitment of change, again, is that starting point for millions of individuals. Again, 2 million per year that are getting served, at least through us. That's the kind of stuff that we see every day. And so for your community, I think there's humility in how you have those early discussions and what it is you're looking to accomplish. And again, whether you succeed or fail in them together. Because I agree with you, it's a bit superficial, it's almost this kind of social media type image that's out there that everything's perfect. We know it's not, and everybody knows it's not. And we've got to have humility about that. And what I'd say by reconnecting with your community, whether it's volunteering with animals or helping people, there's something sort of deeply human about that ability to give back like that, and to see humans in their most vulnerable positions and to see what they're going through. So that all of a sudden, when you're driving your kids to school and you feel like your hair's not done perfectly, it doesn't make a big deal anymore. You know what I mean? Then none of that really matters in the grand scheme of things, because we're all in a process of learning. And the interesting thing, I sort of equate it, life sort of, this maybe sounds a bit dystopian, but it feels like, life's about sort of walking up these escalators. Like I could stand on the escalator and get my way there, or I can sort of learn to walk up it. And sometimes it always doesn't go up. Sometimes it goes down too. The process of overcoming obstacles is one of the greatest learning experiences you could have. So I'm blessed to come from, a rural part of the United States and not having seen what large urban environments look like, because I could experience that, learn from that, appreciate that, grow from that. That level of growth with whatever obstacles you, your listeners, others face, just know that's the learning process, and witness people who are dealing with deep systemic type issues and what they overcome every day. And I promise you, it's going to make the school boards and the local communities and the volunteer efforts much easier.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think I came from a very low income household, family members, some of them in and out of prison, really bad stuff going on. That gave me a giant advantage in all the things that I'm able to. Oh my gosh, it showed me in many ways a lot more about how I didn't want to show up in the world to form how I would show up in the world. And that's fantastic. And a lot of, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about struggle, and most are running away from struggle. Parents are taking struggle away from the kids. I think that's one of the largest contributors to young adults not having the same chances or, of success that my parents did or, the generation before. They're not even ready for adulthood because they're running from struggle. See that in the workplace. Let's remove all struggle from employees. But all the opportunities in the struggle, right? That's how we develop across the board, physically, emotionally, mentally, all of it.
That's exactly right. And again, it's that process of overcoming to maximize your God-given human potential wherever it is in that process of overcoming. You're born with this amazing potential, and we're given a life to figure out how you maximize that potential wherever it is. And what we see is it's different based on individuals. It's not groups, it's individuals. We're all on a journey in our own way, and having, respecting that and where people come from, but making sure it's forward looking towards making that commitment. And again, it's almost like I don't want to equate it too much to like a sales cycle, but being aware is the start. Then being engaged is second. And then making commitments to make that change is third. And then it's follow up and it's action plans and it's check ins and it's, I even not, I mean, people who know me right here, I'm a sucker for scorecards. I'm a sucker for red, yellow, greens on really clear, transformative goals that get people aligned and organized and know where they're headed. And again, it's things that should hopefully be inspirational, things that you could measure. But again, that's another simple. Everybody says, I hear it a lot. You've got to measure things. It doesn't matter if you can't measure it. You hear those sort of sayings. But again, to some of your points earlier, these are basic fundamentals that just aren't done. Like, I don't want to say the bar is that low, but it really is setting the goal, being able to measure it transparently, bringing people along through that process, keeping them committed, keeping them excited. And then again, I found this sort of constant sort of renewal process that's necessary in organizations. And I've known leaders that have been there too long. I've known leaders that, and you can generally spot good leaders based on the actions in the first 90 days. I talk to a lot of folks when you hire someone on, you kind of know how they're going to do, because it's rare if they struggle 90 days in and they just completely turn it around, a year or two later. Like, there's usually a way of leading in that you can spot that those individuals are going to be high performing and really make differences in your organizations as well.
Yeah, I've gotten to where I can tell within the first 2 weeks if we got a star.
Yeah.
Maybe 80 days, okay, we're on track, we're a solid middle performer, but you almost know right away.
It's fair, right? It's totally fair. I will, you know, I'm probably naturally introverted, but have, masked my extroversion over time, and so for me, sometimes it takes a little warming up, but you're absolutely right. You can see early signs, and so much of it is being curious, listening, asking questions, even I love, and by the way, we've got to take care of our young people right now and help them get experience. And a lot of times there's not a lot of opportunities. And you've seen even Lee sort of, this is one of the trends we've seen in the workforce is sort of a freezing up a little bit. Employers are kind of holding on to the folks they have, but they're not necessarily bringing on new ones. Like, the churn rate is sort of slowed, and we actually like to see fairly healthy ones. It's good to go try new experiences, see new things, bring new people in. All of that's sort of energetic in these systems. But there really needs to be a calling for young people to get experience right now. And I found, boy, the ones that are coming from with technical experiences on data, on insights, on digital micro targeting, on new trends and technologies that exist out there. There's really high ROI. They're hungry to get that experience and exposure. And it's part of our own giving back as leaders and organizations to be able to spend time and make commitments to them. I look back, for me, I was so fortunate to have in my 20s work with a real mentor who took the time. And I probably was some arrogant little prick who thought he knew everything, even though I did. It's all the stuff we go through when we're in our 20s,
I knew everything
Um,
at 16, by the way. 16.
right, right. And you make that commitment to individuals, and you bring them along in the process. And that meant so much for me. And I'm constantly reminded there's so many young people who have the same desire and hunger to make a difference in this world and society and make something of themselves. We've got one life to do something, and it goes by so fast. So, that little bit of a reach down with with those folks, that's going to make a big difference. It really is. And we've seen great results from it too.
Well, I like everything you said there was fantastic. Be curious, be present, and also own outcomes. I think the perspective of a lot of the young adults coming into the workforce, they're not thinking that way. I'll ask, so when you get this job, whatever it is, what do you think you're supposed to be doing, or why are they giving you this job? Well, to do whatever they ask me to do. Address customer questions, all that. But really, you're there as part of a team to help that organization create value even better. What if for young adults, when they interview for a job, they say, I'm here to help you create as much value as possible. This is all the research I've done on the organization. And please tell me the best way that I can do this in this position I'm being hired for. I bet the hiring manager would fall out of their chair.
They would. I think you're absolutely right. I think that sort of proactive, in a way, it takes confidence that we're asking a lot of the young people too in this case, right? To talk to Lee Benson, like, I'm not going to talk to Lee. Oh my God, I'm not going to. So there's something that a lot of these individuals we can help with to build confidence and exposure, give them opportunities to succeed, and to your point, to be proactive. There's so many times I look back on it. I'm like, you got to live and breathe whatever it is you're doing. Constantly be thinking about it. Constantly thinking about how to improve that system. It doesn't matter if you think people aren't paying attention. Continue to build those bridges into organizations to say, have you thought of this? Have you, this, I'm noticing this. Have you tried this? Get shut down 100 times. It's fine. That's all part of the process of learning and exploring. People will notice that because, we're all moving fast. I mean, it's interesting. Everything we're doing is getting faster, and good news, it's going to continue to get faster too. Like, it's not like this sort of rate of progress should not slow down if we're doing our jobs as society, right? And kind of where we are right now. And so, you're going to have to be proactive to get attention and be really passionate about the things that you bring.
Yeah. What's interesting to me, but largely because of AI, the quality and actual value seems to be going down in many cases. And I think of AI as, hey, let's use it as a productivity tool. There's so many things it can do, and that's fantastic. So we can create value even faster. Use it to help us think. It poses questions. Look, that's super interesting. Never have it think for you, and don't approach it in a way that says, I'm going to do less and less and make a lot more money. Because most organizations are all starting to look, feel, and sound the same now because they've been homogenized with AI. So I don't even know what I have. And now I'm leaning into, I think what's going to happen is we're going to have this giant trusted relationship network because we can't believe what we're seeing or hearing anymore. What are your thoughts on that in terms of, being able to show value that's actually real and not something that AI created and you're sitting back hoping to make money because you did that?
I think it's interesting. It changes the value that we as humans bring to the equation if it's done right. Again, to your point, the days of writing the 5-page memos on sort of some research related topic where you're essentially just distilling existing information to a package, right? There's no reason why, in a lot of ways, you should not outsource or automate that with other tools to, in theory, allow you to think about what it means or how to apply it, or sort of the next ring up the pyramid towards wisdom that we should bring. And so in theory, it should, yes, help productivity, but allow our thought process to change, to position more, not just in the what, but kind of the so what's and what it means for us, and sort of approach things in different ways. And what it also means is, like, even the nature of meetings and how we talk and present should change based on that. Assume I'm going to use AI to do any research related function, because I should, and you should too, because instead of spending 2 weeks on it, you can do it in 30 minutes. Those are great saves. But it also means, to your point, you can't get lazy about it. We all know we can spot AI. We know all those little dashes. We can always, there's words that get cycled in and out of AI that we're all getting really good at spotting. But it should change the nature and sort of tone of what we're focused on, and getting us to think not, much more critically about what it means and how to apply it is what we've noticed. And I guess then the last thing is, productivity tool is a great thing, but AI in our space, there's not just, and just to sort of pull you in the weeds a little bit to some of our systems, AI is beginning to radically transform how we even accept donations at Goodwill. If you think about how it's making a difference in our business, Because if you think about it, we've got 4,000 collection points today that are receiving people's donated items. The ability to figure out what it is, what brand it is, and where it should go, and can we recycle it or sort of find another purpose for it? All of that's automatable. But what we found is we have to bring the human along with it because we're not an organization. We're an organization focused on our ROI, which is mission. It's not making money at Goodwill. We're a nonprofit. That's what we think about. Our measure of success is how many people did we help? How many did we place into a job? And what were their barriers that they faced through that journey? So what we're finding is you can bring humans along at scale with that. There are ways to, regardless of the skill sets coming in, that you can work with them and apply new technologies, but actually bring sort of the real human capital alongside it. So that, in our resale business, that's a big part of it. And because of it, that's why today at Goodwill, like we're really, in a lot of ways, innovative. We're, high performing. We're sort of progressive on a lot of these leading issues and recycling and new technologies to repurpose and refine things. We really are, I think, really a global product steward. And one quick item here, we're seeing the landscape change quickly. Increasingly, brands and producers of things are increasingly either responsible for what they've produced. We see it in Europe, and you're starting to see it in a couple of U.S. states. Or you're seeing the 85% of, let's say, textiles that we throw away come into question. Is that the right thing to do, to sort of throw things in a landfill? Or let's say if you're even focused on maybe national security and we've got to reclaim critical minerals, not throw them in a landfill or not export them to countries that may not be aligned to some of our values. That's an area that comes into question, if that makes sense too, right? So there's a lot of implications in our business. AI is a big part of it. And it's changing really, really fast. And we're a big part of that change, which is exciting. And that's what's going to motivate a lot of people.
Yeah, in doing the research for this discussion today, I didn't realize that resale is growing at 3 times the rate that regular retail is. And I could see that really going forward. And then textiles, a very, very small percent is recycled. What's possible? Like, where could we get to as you see it? And your point is right on. All the materials here, it just gets moved around and used. There's a way to recycle it. Is it economical or not to do it? But what's the potential here?
So the potential's absolutely massive. I mean, the sort of volumes and the environmental harm, and really even more the loss of domestic economic value by the decisions that we all do make. We're all guilty of this, right? And that's part of that's part of what we're asking about re-engaging with your community on. So to give you a sense, today we collect about 6 billion pounds of materials. At Goodwill, we accept anything. It's part of our DNA and our culture, and we're best in class at finding value in those things that are no longer need, loved, or wanted. We're really good at that. And what we're finding is we're probably, we would say, gosh, we're a third of the donation market that's out there, but we're really single digits when you factor in the things that are thrown away. So we see a massive market opportunity with significant economic value. And before you recycle, or heaven forbid, before you dispose of them, we've actually found resale is the highest and best use. And so why is that? Why, if wouldn't I want to give away a backpack to a school or, do those kind of things? We actually see the economic value when someone in our stores, for example, is purchasing a very low cost item. That's meaningful for them. These are kids going back to school, low income families going back to school, making that purchase. They're actually giving something for it. That sort of transaction is a thing in and of itself because it creates maximal value for programs. And of course, we would appreciate that, but it actually extends the reuse of that item even longer versus just a traditional give it away donation. So the reuse is the highest aspect that's important. And then we look to recycle or repurpose those things, which there are many opportunities. What we found, though, is, speaking of sort of domestic renewal, we've got to rebuild our local infrastructures here in North America to be able to do something about those, though. Because again, it's sort of our hollow economy that we talk about. Again, we're buying everything from somewhere else, using it and throwing it away or giving it away and exporting it somewhere that we don't know about. And that's sort of in a lot of ways an issue too. Like there's something about finding value in our goods and in our local communities that we've also got to renew ourselves against. And I think that's why I genuinely believe donating that item, giving it to someone, whether it's Goodwill or someone else who are going to do good though. And Lee, there are for-profit thrift companies and donation companies. Note that value is not kept locally. That does not provide that economic benefit into those communities, right? So be really savvy about who you donate to. But those are all factors that we need to be considering.
Yeah, I love how this helps the local community, and that's a really big point that you're making there. And backing up a little bit around working with kids and even underserved community adults, what I observe a lot, and you've got a unique energy about you that it's the first time we've had a conversation, but I think naturally you show up in the right way. But usually when folks are addressing them, they're talking at or over them. They're not with their potential. And I think about being there, with their potential. And I get to work with I've worked with thousands of high schools, seniors, juniors around entrepreneurship and thinking about having a business and going through it. And every time I go to these sessions, there's lots of experts, leaders from companies of all sizes, and they talk at or over, and the kids just fold back. I like grabbing a microphone and running out in the middle and just being with all that potential. And I think changing modifying their limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs, but modifying them is maybe the biggest starting obstacle to get them going in the right direction. What do you think about that and approaches to modifying limiting beliefs? My guess is you show up amazingly that way. How do you train others to do it? What's your advice?
I mean, the days of standing behind a podium or, that elite panel, that it's mostly reading their bios versus actually sharing the wisdom. I mean, those are done, and in a lot of ways, I feel the same way you do, Lee. And the good news is most young people respond in kind. They're not going to have the attention span to sort of play out some long diatribe or some more ivory tower type deal that doesn't really connect with them and sort of what they're experiencing in day to day. So get away from those podiums and panels and get down into the floor and really understand the needs and what drives and motivates people. Because, at our core, and I believe this everywhere I've been, whether it's at Goodwill or whether it's been in federal agencies or even in the for-profit, like everyone deserves the opportunity to thrive in their own way, and you choose what you want to do. That's what's beautiful too, right? Maybe you don't want to achieve your maximal potential for whatever reason. And that's okay. No judgment, but for those who do, who want to run, those are the people that probably you and that we're at Goodwill looking for, because those are the people that can help. Those are the folks who aren't going to go back to prison. Those are the folks that are going to, put a firmer hand down and say no to making some, bad decisions in their life that may impact them down the road. And again, whether it's a young person looking for experience, whether it's a person who grew up with no family or no home and so had no guidance, there's just no judgment. Like we're kind of coming at this as humans all together in the same way. And I do want to know if there is anyone out there who's looking for assistance or is looking for help in a no judgment zone, that there's help for them. Like there's help. There's someone out there who believes in them. And try not to turn to things that can bring adverse behaviors. And again, we see it all the time, but just know there's help. And so your example of the way we talk and the way we communicate, if we're not with them, living with them, understanding their needs, you're not doing your job. And it kind of gets back to this thing with even with corporate environments, with big strategic plans that are going to sit on great shelves. You're not bringing your people along with that process. It's not going to do any good either, right?
Yeah, makes total sense. As we wrap up here, organizations that want to take advantage of and work with Goodwill in a win-win way, what are the best ways they can do that?
Here's what I would say. If you're an organization that's best in class at delivering any element of service to help move our society forward, I certainly would want to talk to you. Because if you think about on our mission side, again, we serve millions per year. We've got great access to people with needs. That's really what's unique about our model. We're in every one of your local communities. We're within 10 miles of 85% of the U.S. population with either not just our stores, but our 600 career centers that are out there, our nearly 50 adult high schools that we have out there. Like there's a lot of different support structures that are very unique based on local needs. But if you're a provider, if you're best in class in what you do, we're looking to stitch that together for a full support structure. And think from a technology perspective, just to have a common intake, really in the weeds here, but just if we could ask the same 5 questions of everyone to understand their needs, think of how we could get the support structures and learn from outcomes that benefit individuals on our mission side. On our resale side, if you're a brand, if you're a producer, if you've got volumes, if you're an individual, I would encourage you also to talk to either us, your local Goodwill, because again, I think for many brands, their supply chains end where ours begins. I think there's tremendous opportunity there, tremendous volumes that could, I think, really benefit local communities. And if you're just looking to volunteer or do something good, I do hope you reach out to some of our local Goodwills. There's a lot of different needs that we've got. We hear about them all the time. Things like career navigators to sit. There's something so valuable about sitting across from a table with someone and saying, "How can I help you? Let me understand your story." That question right there to simply open up. I can't tell you how many times we've heard, "No one's ever asked me that before. I'm just a number, or I'm just a government program, or I'm just a box to check." No. What's your story? Like, who are you? Where are you coming from? Those simple things we see change lives over and over.
And I love your no judgment zone. It seems like we have a culture of everybody's an expert of what's wrong with things and people where, let's lift each other up. Let's all go forward. If our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing, where should they go and how can they connect with you?
So one is, again, with our structure, go to goodwill.org. That's our main site. We can direct you to any number of our local affiliates, our local members that are part of the Goodwill network. But we're in your communities, right? We're in your communities. Know who you donate to. Reach out to either our local sites or we can help to direct you in the right way. But let's get America back to work. Let's renew who we are. I love this conversation, Lee, because so much of what we're talking about is foundational. And with all these sort of things that are changing right now, typically we find renewal through strength inside, through our families, through our communities. I'm confident we're going to see that because we've dealt with these before, and that's how we typically get out of them.
Yeah, well, I'd love to have you back again someday to talk even more about strengthening communities and families and getting all this going. Because again, like we talked about before this recording, kids are running the world of the future. I want it to be just incredible. There's so much potential here.
There's so much potential, and the future it's absolutely bright, right? And I'm confident that we're already starting to see early signs of real renewal and improvement. So I'm very optimistic, but at the same time, I understand why there's frustration out there. You can see it in our political and economic type systems. Those are the result of how we feel. So that's okay. And again, we've dealt with that too, but I'm very optimistic with our future. It's encouraging to see some of the early signs of change.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. So thank you so much, David, for being here.
Lee.
Great conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. Until next time, show your value to the world.